Nancy's smirk faltered for the first time as the officer stepped out of the cruiser, his hand resting on his badge. "Ma'am," he said, his voice steady, "you're under arrest." Her eyes widened in shock. "What? This is a mistake." But it wasn't. And as the cuffs clicked around her wrists, I couldn't help but smile. It had all started just a week ago. 3 black SUVs had rolled up to my driveway, their doors swinging open in perfect unison. 6 men in tactical gear stepped out, their badges glinting under the fading light. At the front stood a tall, stone-faced man clutching a folder of documents. Behind him, arms crossed and smirking, stood Nancy, the self-proclaimed HOA president who had been making my life a living hell. "You're in violation of HOA regulations," the man announced, his voice cold and unyielding. "We have a warrant for your removal." Nancy's smirk widened, her eyes gleaming with triumph. She thought she had won. She thought she was about to watch me get dragged off my own property. But what she didn't know, what she couldn't have known, was that the officer stepping out of the next cruiser was one of mine. Naomi had worked her entire life for this moment. A home of her own. A place where she could finally relax. But her peace was short-lived. The day she moved in, Nancy, the self-appointed HOA president, started harassing her with ridiculous violation notices. From the color of her front door to the design of her mailbox, the complaints were endless. Naomi knew something was off. She checked her purchase documents, no HOA agreement, no signatures. Yet, Nancy insisted she was bound by their rules. When Naomi refused to comply, the harassment escalated. Now, with a warrant for her removal, Naomi knew it was time to fight back. Naomi had barely settled into her new home when the first violation notice arrived. It was taped to her front door, bright red and impossible to miss. "HOA violation. Immediate action required," it read. The list of offenses was absurd. Unapproved mailbox design, non-compliant landscaping, failure to register with the HOA. Naomi frowned. She hadn't even unpacked her kitchen boxes yet, and she was certain there was no HOA in her neighborhood. She checked her purchase documents again. No mention of an association, no agreement signed. So, she did what any reasonable homeowner would do. She crumpled the notice and tossed it in the trash. Big mistake. The next day, another notice appeared. This time, it was about the color of her front door. "The shade of brown is non-compliant with community standards," it stated. Naomi rolled her eyes. She hadn't even painted the door. It was the same color as when she bought the house. By the end of the week, her mailbox was stuffed with violation notices. Each one was more ridiculous than the last. Naomi was unloading boxes from her truck when she noticed 2 men in reflective vests standing in her driveway, taking notes. They weren't from the city, they weren't contractors, and they sure as hell weren't supposed to be on her property. She walked over, arms crossed. "Can I help you?" One of them barely glanced up. "Routine HOA inspection, sir." Naomi frowned. "You're on private property. Get off my land." The man smirked. "Not according to HOA records." That's when Naomi noticed the patches on their sleeves. Neighborhood Compliance Officer. A title that meant absolutely nothing. She stepped forward, her voice low. "I'm only going to say this once. Leave, now." The second man shifted uncomfortably, but the first just grinned. "You'll regret this." They left, but Naomi knew this wasn't over. That night, Naomi's security cameras caught something interesting. Nancy, flashlight in hand, was taking pictures of her house. She wasn't just harassing Naomi, she was building a case. Naomi watched the footage, her jaw tightening. This wasn't just about rules, this was about control. Naomi sat at her kitchen table, surrounded by violation notices and security footage. She realized this wasn't just about her. Nancy had been doing this for years, bullying homeowners into submission. But Naomi wasn't like the others. She wasn't going to roll over and obey. It was time to fight back. Naomi knew she needed proof. She drove to the county clerk's office, determined to find out if the HOA even existed. After hours of digging through records, she found nothing. No official registration, no bylaws, no agreements. The clerk looked at her sympathetically. "Ma'am, there's no HOA registered for your neighborhood." Naomi's heart raced. Nancy's entire operation was a scam. Naomi started knocking on doors, talking to her neighbors. What she learned was shocking. "She's been doing this for years," one neighbor said, his voice trembling. "If you don't pay, strange things happen. Windows get broken, tires get slashed." Another neighbor showed Naomi a stack of violation notices. "I paid hundreds of dollars in fines just to keep her off my back." Naomi realized Nancy wasn't just a bully. She was a predator, preying on vulnerable homeowners. One night, Naomi followed Nancy's so-called compliance officers after they left her property. She watched as they met up with a group of men in a dimly lit parking lot. They weren't officers. They were hired thugs. Naomi snapped pictures, her hands shaking. This was the evidence she needed. Naomi spent the next few days gathering as much evidence as she could. She documented every violation notice, every fine, and every interaction with Nancy and her enforcers. She also reached out to other neighbors, encouraging them to come forward with their stories. Slowly, but surely, a picture of Nancy's scam began to emerge. Naomi sat at her kitchen table, surrounded by documents, photos, and notes. She knew what she had to do. It was time to take Nancy down. Naomi stood on Nancy's doorstep, a folder of evidence clutched in her hands. She knocked firmly, her heart pounding but her resolve unshaken. Nancy opened the door, her usual smirk plastered across her face. "Well, well, to what do I owe this pleasure?" Naomi didn't waste time. "Your HOA is a scam. I have proof." She thrust the folder into Nancy's hands. Inside were copies of county records, photos of the fake enforcers, and testimonies from neighbors. Nancy's smirk faltered for a moment, but she quickly recovered. "This is cute. Do you really think this changes anything?" Nancy stepped closer, her voice low and threatening. "You're out of your league, Naomi. You have no idea who you're messing with." But Naomi didn't back down. "I know exactly who I'm messing with. A fraud, a bully. And I'm not afraid of you." Nancy's eyes narrowed. "You'll regret this." As if on cue, two of Nancy's enforcers appeared, flanking her on either side. They were the same men who had been harassing Naomi for weeks. Naomi glared at them. "You're not officers. You're hired thugs. And I have proof." She held up her phone, showing the photos she had taken of them meeting in the parking lot. The men exchanged uneasy glances, but Nancy wasn't fazed. "You think this changes anything? You're still outnumbered." Naomi took a step forward, her voice steady. "If you don't back off, I'll take this to the police. I'll take it to the media. I'll make sure everyone knows what you're doing." Nancy's smirk wavered again, but she quickly masked it with a laugh. "You're bluffing." Naomi shook her head. "Try me." Nancy's enforcers shifted uncomfortably, but Nancy held her ground. "This isn't over," she said, her voice cold. Naomi didn't flinch. "No, it's not, but it will be soon." She turned and walked away, her heart racing but her head held high. She had made her move. Now it was Nancy's turn. Nancy wasn't one to back down. After the confrontation, she escalated her harassment. The next morning, 3 black SUVs rolled up to Naomi's driveway once again. This time, the men who stepped out were dressed as police officers, complete with fake badges and uniforms. One of them approached Naomi, holding up a piece of paper. "We have a warrant for your removal. You're in violation of HOA regulations." Naomi glanced at the paper. It looked official, but she knew better. Naomi decided to play along. She nodded, her expression calm. "All right. Let me grab my things." She went inside, pretending to pack, but she was actually making a call. As the fake officers waited outside, Naomi stepped back onto the porch. "You know," she said, her voice steady, "impersonating a police officer is a felony." The lead officer frowned. "What are you talking about?" Naomi reached into her pocket and pulled out her badge. "I'm the chief of police, and you're under arrest." The men froze, their eyes widening in shock. At that moment, real police cars screeched to a halt in front of Naomi's house. Officers poured out, weapons drawn. The fake officers tried to run, but they didn't get far. Within minutes, they were in handcuffs. As the fake officers were being led away, Naomi turned to Nancy, who had been watching from a distance. "Your move," Naomi said, her voice cold. Nancy's smirk was gone, replaced by a look of pure fear. Naomi stood tall, her badge gleaming under the afternoon sun as she approached Nancy. The smirk on Nancy's face faltered for the first time, replaced by a flicker of fear. "Nancy," Naomi said, her voice steady and commanding, "you're under arrest for fraud, extortion, and impersonating law enforcement." Nancy's eyes widened, and she took a step back. "You can't do this. This is a mistake." But Naomi didn't flinch. She pulled out her handcuffs and snapped them around Nancy's wrists. "You've been running a scam for years, terrorizing innocent people. It's over." Nancy's face turned pale, but she didn't resist. She knew the game was up. With a warrant in hand, Naomi and her team entered Nancy's house. The place was immaculate, but Naomi knew the real mess was hidden beneath the surface. They started in the living room, flipping through drawers and cabinets. It didn't take long to find the first box, stuffed with fake violation notices, each one more absurd than the last. In the study, they found stacks of cash, neatly bundled and labeled with dates and amounts. A ledger sat on the desk, detailing payments from terrified homeowners. But the most damning evidence was in a locked filing cabinet. Naomi broke it open and pulled out a folder labeled City Official. Naomi opened the folder, her heart racing. Inside were emails, bank statements, and even photos of Nancy meeting with a high-ranking city official. The emails detailed their plans, how they would target specific neighborhoods, how they would divide the profits, and how they would cover their tracks. Naomi's hands trembled as she flipped through the documents. This wasn't just a neighborhood scam. It was a citywide operation, orchestrated by someone with real power. Naomi called in reinforcements. Within hours, the investigation expanded to multiple neighborhoods. More victims came forward, each with their own horror stories. One woman showed Naomi her bank statements, detailing thousands of dollars paid in fake fines. Another man had photos of his car after it was vandalized, a warning from Nancy's enforcers. Naomi and her team worked tirelessly, gathering evidence and building a case. They interviewed witnesses, collected documents, and pieced together the full scope of the operation. By the end of the week, the corrupt city official was in custody. His arrest sent shockwaves through the city, and more victims came forward. Nancy's enforcers were next. One by one, they were tracked down and arrested. The neighborhoods were finally free from their reign of terror. Naomi stood outside the police station, watching as the last of the enforcers was led away in handcuffs. She felt a sense of satisfaction, but she knew her work wasn't done. The news of Nancy's arrest spread like wildfire. Headlines screamed, "Fake HOA scam exposed" and "Corrupt city official arrested." The neighborhoods that had lived in fear for years were finally free. Neighbors gathered in the streets, talking excitedly about the arrests. Some cried tears of relief, while others hugged each other, grateful that the nightmare was over. Naomi watched from her porch, a sense of satisfaction washing over her. She had done it. She had taken down Nancy and her operation. As the sun set, Naomi sat on her porch, a cup of coffee in her hands. She thought about how far she had come. Just a few weeks ago, she had been a victim, harassed, intimidated, and pushed to her limit. But she had fought back. She had stood up to Nancy and her enforcers, and she had won. Naomi smiled to herself. She had always been a fighter, but this was different. This wasn't just about her. It was about justice for everyone who had suffered under Nancy's rule. The next day, Naomi watched as the corrupt city official was led away in handcuffs. His arrest was the final nail in the coffin for Nancy's operation. Nancy, desperate to save herself, turned on her partners. She gave the police names, dates, and details, hoping for a lighter sentence. But Naomi knew it wouldn't be enough. Nancy had caused too much pain, too much suffering. She would pay for what she had done. With Nancy and her enforcers behind bars, the neighborhoods began to heal. People painted their houses bright colors, planted flowers, and held block parties. Naomi walked through the streets, smiling as she saw the changes. The fear was gone, replaced by a sense of hope and community. As the days turned into weeks, Naomi felt a sense of justice. She had fought for what was right, and she had won. But she knew her work wasn't done. There were still people out there, suffering under similar scams. and Naomi was determined to help them. A month had passed since Nancy's arrest, and the neighborhood was finally at peace. Naomi sat on her porch, a cup of coffee in her hands, watching the sun rise over the quiet streets. The fear and tension that had once filled the air were gone, replaced by a sense of calm and freedom. Naomi took a deep breath, savoring the moment. She had fought hard for this peace, and she wasn't going to take it for granted. As Naomi sipped her coffee, the mailman arrived. He handed her a stack of letters, and one in particular caught her eye. It was from the Real Homeowners Association. Naomi opened the letter, her heart racing. Inside was a heartfelt message, thanking her for exposing Nancy's scam and bringing justice to the neighborhood. The letter went on to explain that the real HOA had decided to disband. After everything that had happened, they realized that the neighborhood didn't need rules and regulations to thrive. "We believe in the strength and unity of this community," the letter read, "and we trust that you will continue to look out for each other without the need for an association." Naomi smiled as she read the words. It was a victory not just for her, but for everyone in the neighborhood. As she sat on her porch, Naomi thought about how far she had come. She had started as a victim, harassed and intimidated by Nancy and her enforcers. But she had fought back, and in doing so, she had changed the lives of everyone around her. Naomi felt a sense of pride and satisfaction. She had made a difference, and that was something no one could ever take away from her. That evening, the neighborhood held a block party to celebrate their newfound freedom. Naomi was the guest of honor, and everyone thanked her for her bravery and determination. As she looked around at the smiling faces, Naomi knew that this was just the beginning. The neighborhood was stronger than ever, and they were ready to face whatever challenges came their way. Naomi had thought the nightmare was over, but she was wrong. As she sorted through the documents seized from Nancy's house, she found something that made her blood run cold. A folder labeled confidential contained emails, bank statements, and photos linking Nancy to a corrupt politician and a powerful real estate mafia. The scam wasn't just about extorting money, it was about controlling entire neighborhoods, forcing homeowners to sell their properties at rock-bottom prices. Naomi's hands trembled as she flipped through the documents. This was bigger than she had ever imagined. Naomi called an emergency meeting with her team. She spread the documents out on the table, her voice steady but urgent. "This isn't just about Nancy anymore," she said. "This is a citywide operation, and we need to take it down." Her team nodded, their faces grim but determined. They had come this far, and they weren't going to stop now. Over the next few days, Naomi and her team worked tirelessly. They compiled evidence, interviewed witnesses, and prepared a detailed report. When they were ready, they called a press conference. Naomi stood in front of the cameras, her voice strong and clear. "What you're about to hear is the truth," she said. "A truth that has been hidden for far too long." She revealed everything: the fake HOA, the corrupt politician, the real estate mafia. The media exploded with the story, and the public demanded justice. Within days, the corrupt politician was arrested. His downfall was swift and public, and it sent shockwaves through the city. The real estate mafia wasn't far behind. Naomi's team worked with federal authorities to track them down, and one by one, they were arrested. The neighborhoods were finally free. The night after the arrests, the neighborhood held a block party. Naomi was the guest of honor, and everyone thanked her for her bravery and determination. As she looked around at the smiling faces, Naomi felt a sense of pride and satisfaction. She had made a difference, and that was something no one could ever take away from her. The next morning, Naomi sat on her porch, a cup of coffee in her hands. The sun was shining, the birds were singing, and the neighborhood was quiet and peaceful. She thought about how far she had come. From a victim to a hero, she had fought for what was right, and she had won. As Naomi sipped her coffee, the mailman arrived. He handed her a letter from the Real Homeowners Association. Inside was a heartfelt message, thanking her for her efforts and announcing that the HOA was disbanding. "The neighborhood will now be free from any association rules," the letter read. Naomi smiled as she read the words. She had fought for this moment, and it was finally here.